The Right Church, From a Seeker to a Finder. Written by Peter Hoover of Ontario, Canada in the late 1970s. Published in 2021 by Metamorphose Publishing of Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, USA. Chapter 2 of 16. For a long time, the council room door had remained shut, and I began to wonder just what was going on. In all my 16 years, I could not remember Dad, Uncle Dan, and Uncle Lorne staying in the little room for so long with Bishop Sam Fry. The chorister Leonard Gingrich, the other Waterloo man, apparently suffered from boredom too, for after a while he began singing, "We are going down the valley one by one," in his flat, unmelodious voice. A strange selection for a council meeting and communion service. I couldn't help but smile. Yet I helped to sing nevertheless, while my eyes traveled over the familiar scene inside the old meeting house. There, at his traditional place on the front bench, sat Grandpa Stoner, the sun streaming in from the window beside him while lighting up his snowy white hair. The only other men present in the auditorium were Andrew Weaver and Earl Hoover, two men from Allen Miller's church, who had once upon a time been old orders as well. Now their wives appeared in sharp contrast to Our Lady's, for they had bobbed hair protruding from underneath their tiny net head coverings, which they wore only in worship meetings. Beside me on the young boys' benches were Uncle Dan's boys, Leonard, also 16, and Gordon, 2 years younger, both of them seeming like brothers to me, for we had grown up together. On the woman's side, I saw something of a generational gap. Mom and the aunts, Jean and Clara, looked much like the visiting ladies from Waterloo County, with their black cape dresses and white head coverings with black strings tied under their chins. The girls, however, appeared a bit more contemporary, with their hair done up fancier, and only Bertha wore a black dress, for she was the only church member yet. Dad often said Uncle Dan's girls, Ruby and Ruth, should have larger head coverings, but Aunt Jean, their mother, disagreed. Dad and she were not the thickest of chums, to put it mildly. Before we got done with the hymn, and we were going down the valley for the last time, the council room door swung open, and the men returned to their places. Is it just my imagination, or does Uncle Dan look upset, I wondered. I knew he did not exactly share Dad's convictions about being a plain Mennonite, and I wondered how things had gone. Bishop Fry set a plate piled high with strips of bread on the ancient pulpit and asked for the congregation to stand. Somehow, I liked to see the sharp contrast between the elderly man and the fanciness of his environment. It seemed to give him that antiquated, out-of-date look that I thought he must enjoy. On the wall behind him, for example, hung a huge wooden cross, placed there by the Miller folks, and beside him stood the new electric organ that I had never heard. Bright red carpet covered the floor, and a matching piece of red velvet hung over the pulpit. All of these things, I realized afresh, represented the people who had put them there. The Miller Church was just another veneer of modernism stuck onto something old and unchangeable. Most of their members were simply the children of local Mennonite farmers who had grown up just as plain as us. Only now they had tried so hard to break down the cultural barriers between them and contemporary Canadian society. I sort of understood their issues, yet what they had accomplished so far did not impress me much. Fitting in had not garnered many converts yet. None, in fact, so far. All the red carpet, the cross, and the organ did little more than just make this ancient place look ridiculous. Only church members, of course, partook of the bread and wine, after which came the feet washing. Mr. and Mrs. Weaver and the Hoovers left before the tubs and towels were brought out, and I guess they must have felt uncomfortable to witness an ordinance they no longer practiced themselves. This afternoon, they would use this meeting house for their own regular service. After the benediction, we wasted no time getting our wraps on and hurried outside to the cars. The young maples along the road swayed and dipped in the stiff breeze from the lake, while the pines behind the cemetery had picked up their plaintive tune. Yesterday's snow, I noticed, had nearly all disappeared. The old '65 Chev started with a roar and I pulled up to the porch where a cluster of women stood, their skirts fluttering in the wind. Mom wore a bonnet, but Bertha and Nellie did not. "You're planning on going to Uncle Dan's, aren't you?" Mom asked Dad as they climbed into the back seat. "I suppose," he answered with a sigh, and she glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. Sam Fry and the other Waterloo couple pulled out of the lane ahead of us with their shiny black Chrysler New Yorker, and we followed them slowly. "What a spiffy car," Nellie rolled her eyes. "To think that he's the bishop and wants to be so awfully plain." Dad looked displeased, probably about the word awful, but he didn't say anything. I knew what he thought about that vehicle himself. The lake road was wet, and gathering clouds in the west promised more rain coming, or perhaps even snow. "The ditches are full," stated Mom as we crashed through another pothole, which means that if we get snow now, it will stay for the winter. Bertha grimaced. "Don't mention snow," she exclaimed. "I dread those slippery roads going to work." She had a job in the Bethania home for the mentally ill at Vineland, and drove her own yellow VW Bug to and from work every day. Uncle Dan Sterneman's place, like our Stoner farm, is another original Mennonite homestead, situated on a long graveled lane off the lake road, half a kilometer east of the meeting house. Mom grew up here. She was Iona Sterneman before her marriage. It seemed almost like a second home to us children. During the summer months, Uncle Dan's family and ours, along with Mom's other brother Lorne, who never had children, did our haying and threshing together. We shared our machinery and implements freely, and now during the winter, we frequently got together on Sundays. Besides these families in the church, we only had Grandpa Stoner, who lived in the Candlewood Lodge in St. Catherine's. Our circle of friends had been shrinking as long as I could remember. Shortly after noon meal, the Waterloo couples left, saying they did not like to drive on the Queensway with its 4-lane traffic by night. So the young folks, which included all of us cousins, tried to organize a game of Bible Daughters on the sun porch, while Mom and Aunt Jean washed the dishes. From behind us in the living room, I could hear the men talking. Upon hearing Uncle Dan's agitated tone of voice, I now knew for sure that everything was not well. "As far as I am concerned," I heard him say, "the Old Order Mennonite Church here at Dorchester has ceased to exist. What's the use of 3 lonely families trying to hold out if they can't even send us a resident minister?" The "they" he referred to, I knew, was the Waterloo County Church. "Our children can't be expected to put up with this treatment for any length of time, so why can't we just give it up and just join Allen Miller's church? There is absolutely no future for Old Order Mennonites here, and that is that." Uncle Dan had talked like this before, and I knew Dad would answer him again with a cool, reassuring voice that things weren't hopeless yet, and as long as he lived, there would be at least one plain Mennonite in the area, and things like that. Today, I would not be let down. "I don't think your conscience would let you feel at ease by joining Allen Miller's church," answered Dad slowly. "Perhaps we need to ask the Lord for more faith, and He will show us the way to go. At this time, I am satisfied that God still wants a nonconformed, scripturally sound congregation here at Dorchester." "The old orders are not scriptural," snapped Uncle Dan, "and I wouldn't give much for their kind of nonconformity to the world. Did you see the car Sam Fry was driving?" With a snort, he got up to stand by the window to gaze out over the choppy green waters of the lake, where the breakers crashed up on the rocks behind the boarded-up summer cottages along the shore. For the first time in my life, I began to think seriously about what Uncle Dan was trying to say, and I felt a sense of pity for him. I knew how frustrating it was to try to change Dad's mind. He always seemed so firm and so confident that everything would turn out all right, even if everything pointed the opposite direction. Even now, he remained as adamantly determined to stick it out with the old orders as ever. The Bible Daughters game had become boring, and I lost track of the conversation, so I was relieved when the time finally came to go home for chores. "What made you so glum all afternoon?" Bertha wanted to know immediately upon entering the car. Just because Uncle Dan's Ausfix doesn't say you have to take his example. Ausfix was a German expression we had learned from Mom. It meant out of sorts. I'm okay, I replied as the car picked up speed toward Dorchester and home. Somehow, I did not seem to know myself how I felt or where I stood. Would it be wrong or sinful to just go along with Alan Miller's church? At least they do their things peacefully. And the old orders, like Uncle Dan had said, were not particularly scriptural either. What about Jesus' Great Commission? What about disunity in the church itself? I could easily imagine what the Apostle Paul would have to say had he attended our meeting this morning. If we would join another group, like Alan Miller's for instance, or the MB's, my heart quickened. Well, I would face no more obstacles in pursuing an education or choosing whatever profession I would settle on. And couldn't I do this with Christ just as well, or perhaps even better than where we are now? Wow, the short ride home seemed even shorter than ever. And one thing for sure, I had lots of things to consider and pray about.